London fog lay thick upon the city that autumn evening. At 221B Baker Street, Holmes sat idle, craving challenge. Then came the urgent knock at the door. Lady Amelia Hargrove, found dead at her Mayfair townhouse, strangled with her own velvet mask from the masquerade ball. Scotland Yard saw a simple suicide amid scandalous rumors. But Holmes saw a link. The mask's velvet bore faint traces of exotic perfume, not her own. One link in a chain that would bind a killer. The game is afoot. Chapter 1. The first link. I set down these events as they occurred in the autumn of 1895, when the fog lay so thick upon London that the gaslights along Baker Street appeared as mere smudges of yellow in the gloom. At 221B, Sherlock Holmes had been in one of his restless moods for several days. His Stradivarius violin lay silent on the table beside scattered chemical apparatus and the Persian slipper that held his tobacco. The coal fire crackled steadily in the grate, sending a pleasant warmth through the room that smelled faintly of pipe smoke, old leather, and the sharp tang of carbolic from Mrs. Hudson's recent cleaning below. The 17 steps creaked under hurried feet. Mrs. Hudson appeared at the door, her apron dusted with flour. "A gentleman from Scotland Yard, Mr. Holmes." "Inspector Lestrade. He says it is most urgent." Holmes' eyes gleamed with that peculiar light as he set the slipper aside and steepled his fingers beneath his chin. Lestrade entered, bringing with him the bitter cold of the fog and the damp scent of Thames mud that clung to his overcoat. Raindrops pattered from the brim of his hat onto the carpet as he removed it. "Holmes Watson," he said, voice low and hurried. "We've a death in Mayfair. Lady Amelia Hargrove, found this morning in her own boudoir, strangled with a velvet mask from last night's masquerade ball. The door was locked from the inside. No key in the lock. Window latched. Looks like suicide to the commissioner, but something isn't right." Holmes rose at once. "Describe the scene precisely, Lestrade." The inspector paced before the fire, boots leaving faint wet marks. "She lay on the chaise longue, mask tight around her throat like a garrote. Black velvet, silver embroidery. Her lavender perfume still hung in the air, mixed with spilled coffee from an overturned cup. No signs of struggle, no broken nails, no overturned furniture. Sir Reginald, her husband, found her after forcing the door. He claims he was at White's Club until dawn." Holmes drew on his pipe thoughtfully, the rich tobacco smoke curling upward. "And the mask itself? Still around her neck when we arrived. We've removed it now. It's on the table in the boudoir. We left immediately." The hansom cab rattled through the fog-bound streets, wheels grinding over wet cobblestones, the driver's whip cracking sharply. Big Ben told the hour, its deep notes muffled by the mist. The bitter cold seeped through my coat. I could still taste the strong black coffee from breakfast on my tongue. The Hargrove residence on Brook Street stood silent and imposing, its windows dark against the gray afternoon. Inside, the boudoir was as Lestrade had described. Silk drapes limp, a low fire smoldering, the air heavy with lavender and something else, faint, exotic, like cinnamon laced with roses. The velvet mask lay on a small rosewood table, its silver threads catching the hiss of the gaslight overhead. Holmes knelt beside the chaise longue where the body had been found. The carpet felt rough under my knees as I joined him. He lifted the mask carefully, turning it in the light. "Observe, Watson. The clasp is bent inward, not outwards one would expect if the wearer had pulled desperately to free herself. And here," he brought it close to his nose, "a trace of attar of roses, not Lady Amelia's usual scent. This perfume is rare, imported through Limehouse docks in small quantities, often used to mask other odors in contraband shipments." Lestrade snorted softly. "A perfume. You think that proves murder?" Holmes ignored him. "The first link, Watson. Someone else handled this mask shortly before or during the death." He examined the window sill next. Fresh scratches on the latch made by a thin metal tool, not natural wear. And the carpet beneath the window bears faint indentations. Someone stood here, weight shifting. I looked at the marks, barely visible. You mean someone entered by the window? Precisely. Despite the locked door. He turned to the overturned coffee cup. A dark stain spread across the saucer, the bitter aroma still lingering. Holmes dipped a finger and tasted it cautiously. No obvious poison, but we shall have the residue analyzed. We spoke briefly with the maid, Eliza, in the servants' hall below. The air there carried the sharp smell of carbolic soap and damp newspaper used to line the shelves. She twisted her apron in nervous hands, voice trembling. Milady came home alone after the ball, sir. She was wearing the mask. She told me not to disturb her. I heard nothing unusual. Sir Reginald joined us in the drawing room. He was pale, the scent of strong tobacco clinging to his rough tweed jacket. I was at the club all night, he said firmly, fingers playing with his watch chain. Cards, brandy, conversation. Ask Lord Beaumont if you doubt me. Holmes regarded him calmly. We shall, Sir Reginald. As evening fell, we returned to Baker Street. The fog had thickened, hansom wheels splashing through puddles, foghorns moaning from the river. By the fire, Holmes paced, drawing on his pipe. In the affair of the Musgrave ritual, he said, a single faint odor on an ancient parchment led us to the forger's workshop in the East End. Aromas cling to fabric, Watson. They remember every hand that touches them. Just as here, the attar of roses remembers a stranger in that locked room. I nodded slowly, the warmth of the fire soothing after the cold morgue-like chill of the boudoir. Looking back, I should have seen the connection sooner. The link was there, faint but unmistakable. The first link forged. The chain begins. Chapter 2. Forging Connections. As I continue this narrative from my journal, the fog of that October week refused to lift, wrapping London in a perpetual gray shroud that carried the sharp bite of coal smoke from 1,000 chimneys. At 221B Baker Street, the coal fire burned steadily, its warmth a welcome contrast to the bitter chill that seeped through the window frames. Holmes was no longer listless. His eyes held that peculiar gleam of concentration as he paced before the hearth, the rough tweed of his dressing gown brushing against the smooth leather armchair with each turn. Mrs. Hudson had just brought up a tray of strong coffee. Its bitter taste still lingered on my tongue, and the aroma mingled pleasantly with the ever-present tobacco from Holmes' pipe. Our first task, Holmes said, pausing to draw thoughtfully on the stem, is to test Sir Reginald's alibi at White's Club. The chain cannot form if this link proves false. We took a hansom cab through the damp streets, the wheels grinding over slick cobblestones while the horses' hooves clopped rhythmically. Big Ben tolled distantly, its notes muffled by the mist. The club on St. James's Street smelled of aged leather bindings, cigar smoke, and polished oak. Lord Beaumont, a stout gentleman in a checked waistcoat, received us in the smoking room, where gas lamps hissed softly overhead. Hargrove was here until 4 in the morning, Beaumont declared, his voice booming against the high ceiling. We played whist, drank brandy. Asked the porter, he stamped the ledger. Holmes examined the heavy leather-bound book, its pages crisp under his fingers. He noted a faint smudge on the entry for Sir Reginald's departure time. The ink appeared slightly darker, as though added later. The cold marble floor chilled my boots as I stood beside him. Curious, Holmes murmured. The ink has not fully set in one place. We shall return to this. Our next call was to the servants' quarters behind the Hargrove house in Mayfair. The narrow stairs echoed with our footsteps, and the air grew heavy with the damp scent of Thames mud and carbolic soap used to scrub the stone floors. Eliza, the maid, sat on a wooden bench, twisting a rough cotton apron in her hands. Milady had many admirers, sir, she whispered, eyes darting toward the door. But she feared one in particular, Mr. Vickers from the Lyceum Theatre. He gave her that velvet mask as a gift, said it would suit her at the ball. Her voice trembled like the rain now pattering steadily against the small window pane. Holmes leaned forward. Did you see Mr. Vickers at the house recently? No, sir, but he sent telegrams. Milady burned them, but I saw one once, something about money. We proceeded at once to the Lyceum Theatre on Wellington Street. The fog had thinned slightly, but the air still carried the faint whiff of gunpowder from a street vendor nearby. Inside the theater, the velvet seats felt smooth under my palm, and the stage echoed with the thud of footsteps as actors rehearsed. Mr. Vickers, tall and theatrical with a waxed mustache, met us amid the sharp carbolic smell of stage paint and cleaning fluid. The mask? A trifle, Dr. Watson, he said with a flourish, lighting a cigarette whose tobacco smoke curled lazily toward the rafters. Lady Amelia was a generous patron. I was at the ball with her. Yes, but I left before midnight. Asked the doorman. Holmes studied Vickers' boots. Traces of reddish clay clung to the soles, the same hue as the garden soil beneath the boudoir window. You have been in muddy places recently, Mr. Vickers. Rehearsal grounds, nothing more, he replied smoothly, though his eyes flickered. Our final visit that afternoon took us to Kensington, to the elegant drawing-room of Miss Clara Thorne, Lady Amelia's old rival. The room smelled sweetly of brandy from a decanter on the side table and fresh roses in a crystal vase. Silk cushions felt soft against the rough stone of the fireplace around. Miss Thorne, poised and sharp-featured, offered us seats. Amelia and I were once friends, she said, her voice cool, until she stole my intended years ago. But I bear no grudge now. Her fingers twisted a damp handkerchief as she spoke. Holmes' gaze fell on a small silver tray where a telegram lay half hidden, sent that very morning from Sir Reginald. An interesting correspondence, Holmes remarked. She flushed slightly. Merely condolences. As the gray light faded, we returned to Baker Street in another hansom, the cab's wheels splashing through puddles, while foghorns moaned from the river. By the fire once more, Holmes reached for his Persian slipper and filled his pipe, the rich tobacco scent filling the room. Links are forming, Watson, he said. The smudged ledger at white suggests forgery. The clay on Vickers' boots matches the garden beneath the window. Eliza speaks of telegrams and money. Miss Thorne receives messages from the widower, and the attar of roses on the mask still points to Limehouse. I sipped the hot tea Mrs. Hudson had left, its steam rising like the fog outside. Then who is the intruder? Not yet clear. But observe how each piece connects. The chain takes shape before us. Looking back, I confess I missed several connections that day. The clay, the ink, the telegram, each was a link waiting to be forged. Did you spot them before Holmes explained? The evening wore on. Rain drummed softly on the panes, the fire crackled, and distant footsteps echoed on the 17 steps below as another visitor came and went. Holmes stood by the window, gazing into the mist, his silhouette sharp against the gaslight. Data, 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 he murmured. We must gather more. The chain was growing, link by link, and already it pulled tighter around the truth. Links forging. The chain takes shape. Chapter 3. The chain grows. As I record these further particulars in my journal, the fog of that late October week had grown so dense that the gaslights along Brook Street appeared only as faint halos, and the coal smoke from every chimney blended with the damp mist to create an acrid veil. Over London, at 221B Baker Street, the fire burned bright against the bitter cold that pressed against the window panes, its crackling a steady counterpoint to the muffled tolling of Big Ben in the distance. Holmes stood before the mantel, examining once more the velvet mask under the steady hiss of the gas lamp, his long fingers turning it slowly, while the rich scent of his tobacco curled upward from the pipe clenched between his teeth. We must return to the scene, he declared abruptly. The boudoir has been sealed since the discovery, but fresh eyes may yet find what haste overlooked. We took another hansom cab through the fog-bound streets, the wheels grinding wetly over cobblestones while rain pattered steadily on the roof. The driver's whip cracked once, sharp against the dull rumble of traffic, and the horse snorted plumes of steam into the chill air. When we reached the Hargrove residence, the house stood silent, its stone facade slick with moisture that carried the faint reek of Thames mud from the river not far away. Inspector Lestrade awaited us in the hall, his overcoat still damp, the carbolic smell of the police morgue clinging faintly to his sleeves. "Nothing new, Holmes," he said, leading us up the broad staircase. "We've questioned the staff again. No one heard a sound after midnight." The boudoir felt colder than before, as though the room itself retained the chill of death. The low fire had been allowed to die down to embers, and the air held the mingled scents of stale lavender perfume, spilled coffee, and something sharper, faint gunpowder residue that made my nostrils twitch. Holmes moved at once to the window, kneeling on the rough carpet whose pile still bore the faint indentations he had noted earlier. He ran his fingertips along the sill. "Here," he said softly. A single torn thread caught in the frame, black velvet edged with green silk. Not from Lady Amelia's gown, which was entirely midnight blue. He held the fragment to the gaslight. It was minute, yet under close inspection, the green silk gleamed with a quality that spoke of expensive dye. "Spitalfields mills produce this shade for high society ball gowns," Holmes continued. "Someone wearing such a garment climbed or leaned through this window." Lestrade snorted. "A woman, then? In a gown? Through a first-floor window? Or someone disguised as such? Observe also," Holmes pointed to the floor beneath the chaise longue. With a gloved hand, he reached into the narrow space and withdrew a small glass vial, empty but stoppered. He uncorked it carefully. A faint, unmistakable odor rose, bitter almonds. "Cyanide," I said at once, the metallic taste of alarm rising in my mouth. "Precisely, Watson. Residue remains in the bottom, enough to suggest it was added to the coffee. Strangulation was the final act, but the poison weakened her first, rendering struggle impossible." The inspector paced, boots thumping on the parquet. "Then we're dealing with premeditated murder, not a crime of passion." Holmes rose, eyes gleaming. "The chain grows, Lestrade. The thread connects to a Spitalfield's gown. The vial points to a dispensary or laboratory. And the attar of roses on the mask still speaks of Limehouse." He turned to me. "The torn thread bore microscopic fibers of green silk, dyed exclusively at one mill in Spitalfields where patrons of the season procure their ball attire. The link, such dye is traceable through invoices and dye house records. The forge. This recalls the Boscombe Valley mystery, where a single torn fiber from a cuff caught on a bramble unraveled an entire alibi. The murderer had claimed to be miles away, yet the thread matched his coat precisely, forging a chain from Australian goldfields back to an English woodland. In that case, the seemingly trivial snag connected past sins to present guilt, proving that fabrics, like mud or blood, carry indelible memory. The chain, therefore the intruder wore, carried a gown from that very source, entering by this window despite the locked door. The logic binds tightly. How many of these links had you already forged, dear reader, before this moment? The bind. We spent another half hour in the room, Holmes crawling methodically across the carpet, noting every faint mark, every displaced tassel. Outside, rain drummed harder on the panes and distant fog horns moaned like lost souls on the river. The cold marble of the mantel chilled my palm as I steadied myself. Back at Baker Street that evening, the fire roared warmly, chasing away the chill that had settled in my bones. Holmes sat in his armchair, legs stretched toward the blaze, pipe in hand. The hot tea Mrs. Hudson brought tasted sweet after the bitter coffee odors of the boudoir. In a study in scarlet, he reflected quietly. A poisoned pill and cryptic wall writing paralleled this affair. The cyanide vial echoes those capsules, where motive hid in vengeance carried across an ocean. That first adventure taught me how chemistry forges unbreakable links. A mere trace of alkaloid bound Jefferson Hope to his victims as surely as any chain. So here the bitter almond scent connects family secrets to sudden death. I nodded, watching the flames dance. The sense of coal smoke, damp wool from our coats, and Holmes' Strong tobacco filled the room. Sounds drifted in, rain on the window, the soft pop of burning coal, the occasional creak of the house settling. Looking back, I should have connected the vial to poison sooner. The thread, the scent, the scratches, each was a link waiting to be joined. The chain grows stronger. Logic binds. Chapter 4. Testing the links. As I set down these next entries in my journal, the persistent fog of late October had begun at last to thin, though the coal smoke from London's chimneys still hung heavy in the air, mingling with the damp chill that seeped through every crack. At 221B Baker Street, the fire burned steadily, its warmth a comfort against the cold cobblestones we had trodden all day. Holmes stood by the window, watching the gaslights flicker along Baker Street, his pipe sending slow curls of tobacco smoke upward, while the Stradivarius rested untouched on the table beside the gasogene. "The time has come to test each link," he said quietly. "Some will hold, others will shatter. Only the true chain will remain." Our first test took us back to White's Club on St. James Street. The hansom cab rattled over wet paving, wheels splashing through shallow puddles, while rain pattered lightly on the roof. Inside the club, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the rich scent of aged leather armchairs. Lord Beaumont sat in the same corner as before, his checked waistcoat straining as he rose to greet us. "You again, Mr. Holmes," he said gruffly. "I've told you all I know." Holmes produced the ledger page he had borrowed earlier. "This entry for Sir Reginald's departure, 4 o'clock. Yet the ink varies in shade here. I applied a simple reagent this morning. The upper line dried hours later than the rest." Beaumont's face flushed. I may have written it for him after he left. A favor among friends. But he was here until 2 at least, I swear it." The link broke. Beaumont's watch, which he had claimed stopped at 4, had in truth halted at midnight. He confessed he left early himself, but covered for Hargrove out of loyalty. Weak link shattered. We drove next to the narrow East End tenement where Eliza lodged. The stairs creaked underfoot. The air rank with Thames mud and damp newspaper pasted to the walls for warmth. She opened the door trembling, a rough wool shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. "Eliza," Holmes said gently, "you spoke of telegrams from Mr. Vickers. Show us the one you kept." She hesitated, then drew a crumpled paper from her apron pocket. The ink was smudged but legible, Vickers demanding money from Lady Amelia, threatening exposure of some indiscretion. Yet Eliza's own movements that night were vouched for by 3 neighbors who heard her singing hymns until dawn. The link against Vickers strengthened slightly, but her own innocence held firm. From there the cab carried us to the Lyceum Theater. Rehearsals were in full swing. The hot stage lights contrasted sharply with the cold draft from the alley door, and the sharp smell of carbolic cleanser stung the nose. Vickers met us backstage, wiping grease paint from his hands with a cloth that smelled faintly of gunpowder from the prop room. "Your boots, Mr. Vickers," Holmes said. "Reddish clay matches samples from the Hargrove garden exactly." Vickers laughed, too sharply. "Every theater has muddy yards, sir. I walked there after rain." Nothing more. Holmes had brought a small vial of the garden soil. He scattered a pinch beside the boot print on newspaper. The colors were close, but under magnification, the clay grains differed. More iron oxide in the theater mud. Red herring broken. Vickers had been nowhere near Brook Street that night. In Kensington, Miss Clara Thorne received us in her drawing room once more. The sweet scent of brandy lingered from an open decanter, and the fire crackled warmly against the rain tapping the panes. Holmes laid the green silk thread beside a swatch from one of her ball gowns. "It matches," he said simply. Clara paled, but held steady. "Yes." "I tore it at the ball. Caught on a chair." "Ask Lady Marchmain. She saw it happen at 11:30. I never left the ballroom." We verified the statement by telegram. Lady Marchmain confirmed it within the hour. Clara's presence at the ball was solid. Motive lingered, an old jealousy, but opportunity vanished. Link tested and held only as coincidence. At Dr. Hargrove's surgery in Harley Street, the air was sharp with carbolic and the smooth leather of medical bags. The physician, pale and precise, opened his poison ledger without prompting. The vial could have been taken from my dispensary, he admitted, but look, my records show a theft reported 3 weeks ago. I suspected a servant, but could prove nothing. Holmes examined the entry. The handwriting matched the doctor's own, no sign of forgery. The vial was a red herring planted to confuse. Link broken. Our final test came at the Hargrove house itself. Sir Reginald met us in the library, the scent of strong tobacco thick on his clothes, his fingers fidgeting with a gold watch chain. Holmes produced the velvet scrap we had found earlier, torn from the mask's lining, bearing the same attar of roses. "This was in your overcoat pocket when you claimed to be at the club," Holmes said quietly. Reginald's face drained of color. I went home briefly at 2. I found her already gone. I panicked. I took the mask to hide something, her note, perhaps. But I did not kill her. The handkerchief he offered in proof carried the same exotic perfume. A new link formed, stronger than before. We returned to Baker Street as dusk fell. The hansom wheels clattered over glistening cobblestones, fog horns moaning distantly from the river. By the fire, Holmes sat motionless, pipe in hand, while I tasted the lingering bitterness of coffee from our last stop. 5 theories tested, he said at length. 3-week link shattered, Beaumont's forgery, Vickers' mud, the doctor's vial. 2 hold firm. Clara's absence of opportunity, Reginald's perfume trace. The true chain emerges. I look at the scattered notes on the table, threads, soil samples, telegrams. Looking back, I had missed how quickly the false trails collapsed under scrutiny. The true chain emerges. Chapter 5. The chain tightens. As I continued these notes in my journal, the fog had at last begun to thin by early November, though the sharp scent of coal smoke still hung over London streets, and the bitter chill of approaching winter made every breath visible in the gaslight. At 221B Baker Street, the coal fire roared warmly, its crackle a steady comfort against the cold drafts that slipped under the door. Holmes paced rapidly before the hearth, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar light of certainty, the rough tweed of his coat brushing the worn leather armchair each time he turned. "The perfume on the mask and the handkerchief is the same attar of roses," he said, stopping abruptly. "It points to Limehouse docks. Sir Reginald has lied about his movements. The chain tightens now, Watson. We confront him tonight." We set out immediately for White's Club on St. James Street. The hansom cab rattled through the damp avenues, wheels grinding over glistening cobblestones while rain began again, pattering sharply on the roof. Big Ben tolled 9, its deep notes echoing through the mist as we arrived. Inside the club, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the rich smell of polished oak and brandy. Sir Reginald sat alone in a corner alcove, a half-empty glass before him, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. Holmes approached without preamble. "Sir Reginald, the attar of roses on Lady Amelia's mask matches the trace on your handkerchief. You handled it after her death, or during. You were not at this club until dawn." Reginald's face drained of color. He rose suddenly, chair scraping back with a harsh sound on the parquet floor. "You have no proof," he muttered, then bolted for the side door. We gave chase at once. The fog outside had thickened again, swallowing the gaslights in gray halos. Reginald's footsteps pounded ahead, splashing through puddles as he darted down a narrow passage toward Piccadilly. A hansom cab clattered past, its driver shouting as Reginald nearly collided with the horse. He turned into an alley near St. James Park, where the damp earth smelled strongly of wet leaves and Thames mud carried on the wind. Holmes closed the distance, tackling him against a brick wall slick with moisture. Reginald struggled briefly, his rough wool coat tearing at the sleeve, then went limp as Holmes pinned his arms. "You cannot run from the chain," Holmes said quietly, breath steady despite the chase. "It binds you now." We brought him back to the Hargrove residence under police escort. Lestrade had been summoned by telegram and met us at the door. In the library, lit only by the low fire and a single gas lamp, Holmes searched Reginald's overcoat pockets. "This matches the mask exactly," Holmes said, holding it to the light, "and the adder, imported only through one Limehouse apothecary. You visited your mistress there, did you not? The same woman who supplied the cyanide vial." Reginald's shoulders sagged. She She was jealous. Amelia discovered the affair. "I only meant to frighten her, poison in the coffee to make her ill. But she fought when I tried to leave. I I tightened the mask to silence her. It was over in moments." The breakthrough came swiftly after that. Lestrade sent men to Limehouse at once. By midnight they returned with the woman, Marie Duval, a French emigree who kept a small shop near the docks. The air in her cramped parlor smelled of spices, gunpowder from firecrackers sold to sailors, and the same attar of roses that clung to everything she touched. "I gave him the vial," she confessed in a low voice, trembling as rain drummed on the tin roof overhead. "He said it was for rats. When he came back 2 nights later, wild-eyed, I knew. He paid me to stay silent." Holmes turned to me, voice calm. The velvet scrap in his pocket bore fresh adder oil stains, viscous and unmistakable. The link, that particular adder is sold only at Duval's shop, cross-referenced with import manifests from the East India docks. A forge. This recalls the sign of 4, where wooden legs print in poisoned darts forged a chain from Indian mutiny to English drawing rooms. The adder there masked the scent of the blowpipe, but revealed the convict's trail across continents. Jonathan Small's vengeance bound him by exotic traces he never thought to erase. So here the perfume links Reginald directly to the murder weapon and the supplier. The chain. The chain tightens. No escape remains. Did you see this final connection form before now, dear reader? The bind. We returned to Baker Street as the small hours approached. The handsome wheels splashed through puddles, foghorns moaning distantly from the river. By the fire once more, Holmes sat motionless, pipe in hand, while I sipped hot tea whose steam rose like the mist outside. In the Hound of the Baskervilles, he reflected quietly, a spectral beast concealed human malice, much as the velvet mask concealed betrayal. The Moor's sense of peat and heather paralleled this fog. Chains of legend broke only when logic revealed Stapleton's greed. So here jealousy and debt forged the true links. The room smelled of coal smoke, damp wool from our coats, and the lingering tobacco from Holmes' pipe. Sounds drifted in, rain on the panes, the soft pop of burning coal, the occasional creak of the house settling after the night's excitement. Looking back, I had not fully grasped how swiftly the chase would come, nor how decisively the perfume would bind him. The evidence had been there, link by link. The chain tightens. No escape now. Chapter 6. Links to the past. As I commit these concluding threads to my journal, the early November fog had finally yielded to a crisp, cold clarity, though the ever-present coal smoke still drifted across London's rooftops, carrying the faint, acrid tang that never quite left the city air. At 221B Baker Street, the fire burned low and steady, its warmth spreading through the room like a quiet reassurance after the turmoil of the previous days. Holmes sat motionless in his armchair, legs stretched toward the hearth, pipe in hand, while the soft pop of burning coal and the distant clatter of a late hansom cab provided the only sounds beyond our breathing. "The arrest is tomorrow," he said quietly, "but the chain is not yet fully explained. We must trace how the present links reach back into the past. Reginald Hargrove's history holds the final pieces." We began at the Hargrove residence the following morning. The house felt emptier now, its silence broken only by the creak of floorboards under our boots and the low crackle of the library fire. Sir Reginald, released briefly under heavy police guard to assist the inquiry, sat pale and silent in a high-backed chair, the rough tweed of his jacket creased from sleepless nights. Lestrade stood by the window, arms folded, the cold glass fogging slightly with his breath. Holmes opened the small wall safe behind a portrait of Lady Amelia. Inside lay a bundle of yellowed papers, old telegrams, unpaid bills, mortgage notices, all damp and musty, carrying the faint moldy smell of neglected documents mixed with coal dust from the grate. He spread them on the desk. Bankruptcy Proceedings 1892, Holmes read aloud. Sir Reginald's estate was nearly lost after a disastrous speculation in South African mining shares. Lady Amelia's fortune, her father's shipping interests, was the only thing that saved him. She married him knowing the risk, but on condition that he reform. Reginald's voice was hoarse. She never let me forget it. Every dinner, every ball, she reminded me I was living on her charity. Holmes lifted a telegram dated 6 months earlier. And here, demands from creditors in Limehouse. They knew where to find you because of your visits to Marie Duval. The affair began as a way to escape those reminders. The motive crystallized. Greed compounded by humiliation. Lady Amelia had recently threatened to cut him off entirely after discovering the affair. The poison and the mask were not impulse, they were planned deliverance from debt and shame. We moved to the study next door. Holmes examined the desk drawers, finding a hidden compartment beneath a false bottom of smooth mahogany. Inside lay a small ledger, entries in Reginald's precise hand recording withdrawals from Amelia's accounts, disguised as household expenses. The paper felt crisp yet worn at the edges, as though handled often in secret. These sums matched the payments to Duval, Holmes said, and the timeline aligns perfectly. He left White's at 2, returned here by 3, administered the poison in her coffee, waited for it to take effect, then strangled her with the mask she still wore from the ball. The locked door and window scratches were meant to suggest an intruder. Lestrade nodded slowly. And the adder perfume? Duval's signature scent. He handled the mask after the act, perhaps to adjust it, perhaps in panic, transferring the odor. The torn velvet scrap in his pocket was torn when he forced the clasp tighter. All the links now connected, the perfume to Limehouse and the mistress, the vial to the theft he staged to implicate his brother, the green silk thread a deliberate red herring planted from a borrowed gown fragment, the timeline sealed by the cab driver who recalled dropping a gentleman near Brook Street at 2:30, the motive rooted in years of resentment and looming ruin. By evening we returned to Baker Street. The fire had been built up again, its heat welcome against the sharp drop in temperature outside. Mrs. Hudson brought hot tea, its steam rising sweetly in the tobacco-scented air. Holmes sat back, steepled his fingers, and spoke in his measured way. In a valley of fear, he reflected, a man's disguised past linked him to an American secret society. The chain stretched from Pennsylvania coal mines across the Atlantic to an English manor house. Bertie Edwards lived under a false name, yet small traces, mannerisms, a coded warning, a hidden tattoo, forged connections that no disguise could sever. A criminal believed time and distance would erase his history, but observation brought every link into the light. So here Reginald believed marriage and money would bury his failures, yet debt, jealousy, and perfume wove an unbroken chain from past shame to present murder. I sipped the tea, tasting its comforting sweetness after the day's bitterness. The room smelled of coal smoke, damp wool from our coats left drying by the door, and the faint lingering trace of homespun tobacco. Outside, rain had begun again, tapping steadily on the panes while Big Ben chimed the hour, its notes clearer in the cleaner air. Looking back, the past had been there all along, in the yellowed papers, the secret ledger, the whispered affair. I had seen fragments, but not the full span of the chain until Holmes laid it out. Past and present, Holmes said softly, setting his pipe aside, one unbroken chain. Past and present, one unbroken chain. Chapter 7. The complete chain. As I write these final pages of the active investigation in my journal, a pale November sun had broken through the thinning fog, casting long, cold shadows across the streets of London, though the familiar bite of coal smoke still lingered in every breath. At 221B Baker Street, the coal fire had been built high against the chill, its steady crackle and the hiss of the gas lamps creating a warm, intimate circle amid the gathering tension. Mrs. Hudson had just cleared away the breakfast tray, strong coffee with its lingering bitter taste on my tongue, when Inspector Lestrade arrived with the suspects in tow. They filed into the sitting room one by one. Sir Reginald Hargrove, pale and hollow-eyed, wrists already lightly manacled. Miss Clara Thorne, composed but watchful. Mr. Vickers from the Lyceum, mustache twitching nervously. Eliza the maid, twisting her apron in rough, anxious hands. Dr. Hargrove, the brother, stiff and professional in his black coat. And Lord Beaumont, bluff and uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot on the worn carpet. The room smelled of tobacco from Holmes' pipe, damp wool from outdoor coats, and the faint carbolic trace that clung to Lestrade's sleeves. Holmes stood before the fireplace, tall and calm, steepled fingers resting under his chin as he surveyed them. "Gentlemen and ladies," he began quietly, "every link in this chain has now been forged. I shall lay them out one by one, so that no doubt remains." He turned first to the physical evidence. The velvet mask, black, silver threaded, bore a bent clasp pressed inward by strong, calloused hands. Sir Reginald's palms show the marks of riding reins and stable work. The doctor's are smooth from gloves. The mask also carried attar of roses, a scent sold only at Marie Duval's Limehouse shop, where Reginald was a frequent visitor. A torn scrap of the same velvet was found in his overcoat pocket, still fragrant. The vial of cyanide residue matched poison stolen from Dr. Hargrove's dispensary 3 weeks earlier. Reginald had access to the keys during a family visit. These are not coincidences. They are physical links binding the murderer to the weapon and the means. Next came the timeline. Sir Reginald left White's Club at 2 o'clock, not 4 as Lord Beaumont's forged ledger claimed. A cab driver recalls setting down a gentleman matching his description near Brook Street at 2:30. Lady Amelia's coffee was poisoned then. The poison acted slowly, weakening her. By 3, he had strangled her with the mask she still wore from the ball. He locked the door from inside, scratched the window latch to suggest an intruder, and departed the same way he entered, through the garden gate, leaving faint boot prints in the clay. The clock in the boudoir had stopped at 3:12. Its hands were deliberately halted to confuse the hour of death. Holmes moved to the witnesses. Eliza heard no struggle because the poison had already silenced Lady Amelia's cries. Miss Thorne was at the ball until dawn, witnessed by Lady Marchmain, ruling her out despite old jealousies. Vickers' boots carried theater mud, not Brook Street clay. His telegrams were threats of debt collection, not murder. Beaumont's lie protected a friend, but crumbled under reagent and contradiction. Only Reginald's movements aligned perfectly with the evidence. The motive links followed. Sir Reginald faced ruin. Bankruptcy papers from 1892 show his estate saved only by Lady Amelia's fortune. Recent telegrams from Limehouse creditors pressed him harder. She had discovered his affair with Marie Duval and threatened to cut him off entirely. The poison and strangulation were not passion. They were calculated deliverance from debt and daily humiliation. The ledger hidden in his desk records secret withdrawals from her accounts to pay Duval and others. Greed and shame drove him. The chain of motive is as strong as any physical link. Finally, the connecting thread. The attar of roses was no accident. Reginald handled the mask after the act, perhaps to adjust it in panic, perhaps to make the scene appear self-inflicted. That single scent tied Limehouse to Mayfair, mistress to murder, past shame to present crime. Every loose end, forged alibis, planted clues, red herrings, dissolves when this final link is forged. Reginald had listened in silence, head bowed. When Holmes finished, he looked up, voice cracked. "I never meant. The poison was to make her sleep. She woke, struggled. I only wanted to quiet her. It was over so quickly." Lestrade stepped forward. "Sir Reginald Hargrove, I arrest you for the murder of Lady Amelia Hargrove." The handcuffs clicked shut with a soft metallic sound that seemed to echo in the quiet room. Reginald did not resist. He merely stood as the inspector led him toward the door, footsteps heavy on the stairs. The others remained seated a moment longer, stunned. Clara exhaled slowly. Vickers wiped his brow. Eliza began to weep quietly into her apron. Dr. Hargrove stared at the floor. Beaumont muttered apologies under his breath. Holmes turned to me, voice low. Every link accounted for, Watson. The chain is complete. The room slowly emptied. Lestrade's men clattered down the 17 steps, voices fading into the street where a police van waited, its horse stamping restlessly on the cold cobblestones. Outside, the pale sun glinted on wet paving. Inside, the fire crackled on, warming the now empty chairs. I looked at Holmes, who had returned to his armchair, pipe lit, eyes half closed in thought. Looking back, the entire sequence, from the first faint trace of Adder to this final confrontation, had unfolded with terrible inevitability once the links began to join. Every link accounted for. The chain complete. Chapter 8. Justice in Chains. As I record the immediate aftermath in these pages, a pale winter sun filtered weakly through the thinning November fog, casting long, cold shadows across the cobblestones of London, while the ever-present coal smoke drifted lazily from chimneys, carrying its familiar acrid bite. At Scotland Yard, the air inside the stone corridors felt sharp with carbolic disinfectant and the damp chill that never quite left the old building, even with fires burning in the grates. Footsteps echoed along the tiled halls, constables moving briskly, keys jangling on heavy rings, the occasional low murmur of voices behind closed doors. Sir Reginald Hargrove was brought in under escort shortly after noon. The police van had rattled through the streets from Baker Street, its iron-rimmed wheels grinding over wet paving while the horse snorted plumes of steam into the crisp air. Lestrade himself supervised the transfer, his overcoat still damp from the morning mist, the rough wool brushing against Reginald's as they guided him down the narrow passage to the charge room. Inside, the room smelled of old ink, polished wood, and the faint metallic tang of the iron bars on the holding cells beyond. Reginald stood motionless while the sergeant removed the light manacles from his wrists, replacing them with heavier cuffs that clicked shut with a final, resonant sound. His face was ashen, eyes sunken. The once confident posture now slumped beneath the weight of what had been laid bare at 221B. The rough tweed of his jacket hung loosely on his frame. A faint trace of attar of roses still clung to the collar, a mocking remnant of the chain that had bound him. "You have nothing to say?" Lestrade asked, voice steady but not unkind. Reginald lifted his head slowly. I thought the poison would only make her sleep." When she woke and struggled, his voice cracked, trailing into silence. He stared at the scarred wooden table before him, fingers twitching as though still feeling the velvet mask in his grasp. Then, in a rush, the confession poured out again, halting, broken sentences about debt, humiliation, the unbearable pressure of living on his wife's charity. "I never meant murder. It happened so quickly. I panicked." Lestrade nodded to the sergeant, who began transcribing the statement in a heavy ledger, pen scratching steadily across the page. The room grew quieter save for that sound, the distant clatter of typewriters in adjoining offices, and the low murmur of rain returning to tap against the narrow windows. Loose ends were tied swiftly in the hours that followed. Miss Clara Thorne was formally cleared by telegram from Lady Marchmain, confirming her presence at the ball until dawn. Her old jealousy, though real, had no place in the chain of evidence. Vickers' telegrams proved to be mere creditor demands, no threat of violence, and his alibi at the Lyceum held firm under renewed questioning. Eliza, tearful but relieved, was absolved of any complicity. Her only fault had been silence born of fear. Dr. Hargrove's dispensary records were re-examined in his presence. The theft of the cyanide vial dated precisely to a family dinner when Reginald had access to the keys. Beaumont's forged ledger entry was admitted as misguided loyalty, not malice. He faced only a caution. Lestrade met us later in his office, a small room warmed by a coal fire that crackled cheerfully against the cold stone walls. The inspector poured 3 glasses of brandy from a decanter on the shelf, the sweet, burning taste cutting through the lingering bitterness of the day. He raised his glass. "Your methods, Holmes," he said simply. "Without them, we'd still be calling it suicide." Holmes inclined his head, drawing thoughtfully on his pipe. The rich tobacco smoke curled upward, mingling with the coal smoke from the grate. "The chain was always there, Lestrade. It only required forging link by link." We spoke briefly of the trial to come, Old Bailey, likely swift given the confession and physical evidence. The velvet mask, the vial, the adder traces, the hidden ledger, all would be presented in court, each piece a link in an unbreakable sequence. Reginald's barrister might argue diminished responsibility or accident, but the premeditation, the stolen poison, the forged alibi, the calculated return to the house, left little room for doubt. As evening fell, we returned to Baker Street in a hansom cab. The wheels clattered over slick cobblestones, the driver's whip cracking once against the gathering dusk. Fog horns moaned distantly from the Thames, and Big Ben told the hour with deep, measured strokes that seemed to carry across the entire city. Inside 221B, the fire had been tended high by Mrs. Hudson. Its warmth chased away the chill that had settled in my bones during the long day at the yard. Holmes settled into his armchair, legs stretched toward the blaze, while I poured hot tea from the pot left steaming on the side table. The sweet steam rose, carrying a faint comfort after the stark realities we had witnessed. Reginald's final words echoed in my mind. Panic, not premeditated cruelty. Yet the chain did not distinguish intent from act. The mask had been tightened, the life extinguished. Justice, though slow and measured, had closed around him like iron. Outside, the gaslights flickered on one by one along Baker Street, their soft hiss mingling with the rain now falling steadily. The criminal bound. Justice served. Chapter 9. Links restored. As I bring this narrative near to its close in my journal, a pale December light now filtered through the windows of London. The last remnants of autumn fog, having given way to sharper, colder air that carried only the faintest trace of coal smoke on the breeze. The streets felt cleaner, the gaslights brighter in the early dusk, and the clatter of hansom cabs seemed somehow lighter, as though the city itself breathed easier with one dark shadow removed. At the Old Bailey, the trial of Sir Reginald Hargrove proceeded swiftly and without drama, the great wooden courtroom echoing with measured voices beneath its high, coffined ceiling. The proceedings began on a crisp Monday morning. The velvet mask, carefully preserved in a glass case, was placed before the jury as Exhibit A. Its black surface gleamed dully under the skylight, silver threads catching the light, while the bent clasp and faint traces of attar of roses told their silent story. Holmes, called as the principal expert witness, stood in the box with calm authority, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed chamber. "Every physical link," he explained, binds the accused directly to the crime. The mask's clasp was compressed by hands bearing the calluses of frequent writing, marks absent from medical or theatrical professions. The adder perfume matched samples from Marie Duval's Limehouse shop, where Hargrove was a known visitor. The cyanide vial, stolen from his brother's dispensary during a family visit, bore fingerprints consistent with his own. The hidden ledger in his study recorded secret withdrawals from Lady Amelia's accounts to pay debts and maintain the affair. These are not suppositions. They are facts forged in evidence. The prosecutor laid out the timeline with precision. Departure from White's at 2 o'clock, arrival at Brook Street by 1:30, administration of poison in the coffee, strangulation at approximately 3, the stage, locked door and window scratches. Cab drivers, neighbors, even the stop boudoir clock, all corroborated the sequence. His barrister argued momentary panic rather than premeditation, but the jury, 12 ordinary Londoners, listened in grave silence, faces set as the chain of logic tightened around the prisoner in the dock. The verdict came after less than 2 hours' deliberation. Guilty of murder. Sentence was pronounced the following day, death by hanging, though whispers in the corridor suggested a likely commutation to life imprisonment given the absence of prolonged cruelty. Reginald stood motionless as the black cap was placed symbolically before him, then led below, footsteps fading into the stone passages. With the verdict delivered, the innocent parties found their names cleared in full. Miss Clarathorne emerged from the shadow of old suspicion. Within weeks, she announced her engagement to a gentleman long patient in waiting, and the newspapers spoke kindly of her grace under unwarranted strain. Eliza, the maid, received a modest legacy from Lady Amelia's revised will, discovered in a sealed envelope among private papers, and accepted a position as housekeeper in a quieter Mayfair household, her nervous manner gradually easing. Dr. Hargrove resumed his practice with renewed quiet pride. The theft of his vial had been no fault of his own, and patients returned in greater numbers, reassured by the public vindication. Mr. Vickers' theater flourished anew. The Lyceum enjoyed a surge of curious attendance after the case, and he staged a successful revival of a melodrama that drew crowds eager for echoes of real-life intrigue. Lord Beaumont, chastened by his part in the forged alibi, quietly reduced his gambling and was seen more often at charitable functions than at the card table. London itself seemed to settle back into familiar rhythms. Gas lights flickered on at dusk as they always had, coal fires warmed drawing rooms, and the great clock of Big Ben told the hours with steady assurance. At 221B Baker Street one quiet evening, Holmes and I sat by the fire as usual. The coal burned low, sending a gentle warmth through the room scented with tobacco and the faint sweetness of Mrs. Hudson's fresh scones brought up earlier. Holmes drew thoughtfully on his pipe, eyes half closed. The court's verdict, he said softly, serves as the final bind. The evidence, mask, vial, perfume, ledger was presented unchallenged, each piece interlocking without gap. Here, too, the links of observation and reason prevailed over deception. The chain, orders restored. Did you, dear reader, foresee how completely the chain would bind when the first trace of adder was noted? The bind. I nodded slowly, watching the flames dance. The trial had been the last act of forging. Now the chain rested, complete and unyielding. Looking back, the restoration felt almost quiet after the storm, innocence freed, futures reclaimed, the city moving forward as it always did. Outside, a light snow began to fall, dusting the cobblestones in soft white. The gaslights glowed warmly through the flakes, and distant footsteps echoed faintly on Baker Street as London returned once more to its ordinary nights. Order restored to London streets. Chapter 10. By the fire at Baker Street. As the year drew toward its close, and the first true snow of winter settled softly over London, I find myself once more at my desk in the quiet sitting room of 221B Baker Street, setting down the last reflections on this remarkable affair. The coal fire burned low and steady, casting a warm, amber glow across the familiar furnishings, the worn leather armchairs, the scattered chemical apparatus, the Stradivarius resting on its shelf. Outside, the gaslights along Baker Street flickered through falling flakes, their soft hiss mingling with the muffled clatter of a passing hansom cab and the distant, steady toll of Big Ben marking the late hour. Mrs. Hudson had just brought up a fresh pot of tea and a plate of her excellent scones, their warm, buttery scent blending pleasantly with the rich tobacco smoke from Holmes' pipe. He sat in his usual chair, legs stretched toward the blaze, eyes half closed in that contemplative mood that so often followed the conclusion of a case. I poured 2 cups, the hot liquid steaming sweetly on my tongue after the day's chill, and settled opposite him. The newspapers of the past fortnight had been full of the Hargrove trial, headlines proclaiming Mayfair murder solved by logic alone, velvet mask concealed deadly truth, and similar sensational phrases. The confession, the verdict, the commutation to penal servitude for life, all were reported in exhaustive detail. Yet here, in this room where the chain had first begun to form, the matter felt simpler, more intimate. Holmes drew thoughtfully on his pipe before speaking. A satisfactory conclusion, Watson. The chain was forged link by link, tested, and found unbreakable. Yet it is worth reflecting on the method itself, for it is the true constant in these affairs. He leaned forward slightly, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Observation is the first link, trivial to most, yet pregnant with meaning to the trained eye. The faint attar of roses on the velvet mask, the bent clasp pressed inward, the torn green silk thread caught in the window frame, the bitter almond trace in an empty vial. Each was a separate fact, seemingly disconnected. But reason forges the connections. When you eliminate the impossible, locked door, no struggle, apparent suicide, what remains, however improbable, must be truth. An intruder known to the victim, poison administered in familiar drink, strangulation to ensure silence, a staged scene to mislead. He paused, watching the flames dance. Consider the parallels with earlier cases. In the Copper Beeches, the single violet hair on a child's dress linked a governess's imprisonment to a hidden wing of the house. A trivial detail forged a chain that exposed years of deception. Here the adder perfume performed the same office, exotic, unnecessary, yet clinging stubbornly to fabric and memory. The criminal overlooked it, as so many do, believing disguise and distance would sever the past from the present. But the science of deduction does not permit such severance. Every action leaves a trace. Every trace, properly observed, connects to another. Link by link, the chain emerges. Physical evidence to timeline, timeline to motive, motive to history. Deception fails because it cannot account for every detail. Truth prevails because it must. I nodded slowly, the warmth of the fire easing the lingering ache from our winter walks. And yet, Holmes, the human element remains. Reginald was not a monster born. He was a man broken by debt, pride, and resentment. The chain bound him, but did it also explain him? Explanation is not absolution, Holmes replied quietly. The chain reveals what happened and why. It does not forgive. But understanding the links, greed overlaid on shame, jealousy fed by dependence, prevents us from dismissing such crimes as mere madness. They are logical in their twisted way. That is why observation defeats deception. The deceiver must construct an entire false world, while the observer need only find one inconsistency. One mismatched scent, one bent clasp, one halted clock, and the illusion collapses. He set his pipe aside and reached for the violin, plucking a few soft, random notes that drifted through the room like smoke. The method is simple in principle, complex in application. Collect data relentlessly. Discard nothing. Connect everything. When the impossible is eliminated, the remaining truth, however unwelcome, stands alone. That is the science of deduction, not magic, but relentless reason applied to observable fact. The fire crackled softly, sending sparks upward. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the city sounds until Baker Street felt almost rural in its quiet. I thought of the chain we had built together from the first visitor at 221B, through fog-bound streets and shadowed rooms, to this fireside reflection. Holmes had been idle and restless. Now he was satisfied. The gleam in his eye tempered to calm contentment. I had been puzzled, then astonished, now quietly admiring as always. The mystery that had baffled Scotland Yard had unfolded clearly before us, link by link, until justice held the guilty fast and order returned to London's streets. Holmes set the violin down. Another chain forged. Watson. Another truth brought into the light. The city sleeps more easily tonight because small details were noticed when others passed them by. I smiled faintly. Until the next puzzle arrives. Indeed. He leaned back, eyes on the flames. Forge your own chains of logic, dear reader. Observe keenly, connect fearlessly, and let reason be your guide. The world is full of hidden links waiting to be discovered. The fire burned lower, the snow fell thicker, and the room grew still save for the soft ticking of the mantel clock. Holmes closed his eyes, pipe forgotten in his hand. I closed my journal, the last entry complete. Until the next chain forges, dear listener, the game continues.